Okay. Hello, thank you for inviting me. I will present something which is not related to any of my current projects, but is an idea which I have in mind for a longer time. And when I saw the topic of this workshop, I guess it could be useful. I will be agree at least to some part. I will be disagree at least to some part with Ondřej, because I believe, in my personal point of view, in Czech we have strong illiberal tradition in a history, but it's some type of unspoken tradition, which on the other hand influence our understanding of a democracy and world politics now. My general idea is somehow connected to the current discussion about the democracy and more concretely how people view democracy. Because we see in recent years a lot of studies which conclude that the people understand democracy a lot differently than experts. And this disagreement is a big problem, and one way why politicians like Viktor Orbán are able to sell their idea, because a lot of common people didn't really believe that the democracy have some aspects which experts believe the democracy must have, which is the whole discussion between liberal and illiberal democracy. And I want to know how Czech society understand the democracy, at least the majority, and also what it means for our understanding of our recent history. And I believe I have a good case for these ideas. And the case is the Czechoslovak Third Republic, which is technically the political regime which exists after the Second World War until the communists take over or coup in February 1948. And in my point of view, the Czech public still have some very romantic interpretation of this time period, which led us to the non-satisfactory understanding of democracy. And this is not the isolated aspect. It's somehow connected to the topic which Ondřej already mentioned, and that was the struggle about the soul of the nation in 90s between the Václav Havel and Václav Klaus. Václav Havel believed in more or less some updated version of liberal democracy concept. Václav Klaus, on the other hand, was Schumpeterian, if we can say it in politologic terms, but I'm not really sure if he understands properly Schumpeter, because he was even the minimalist Schumpeterian. But of course, these two big charismatic personalities and their very different understanding of politics was very influential for the public thinking about democracy. Because even to this day, if you ask the persons on the street what democracy is, the majority of them tell you, well, it's a system when you have elections and you can elect your candidate. But it's not enough. And it's, from my point of view, it's very connected to the public nature of understanding of the post-war Czechoslovakia. Because, well, we basically understand that Prague was liberated by Soviet soldiers. And usually, if you open the newspaper or a public debate in TV, the experts mention this period as a short democratic period between two totalitarian regimes, or the last few years of freedom, etc., etc. Or perhaps you can hear about the People's Militia of the Communist Party, because that was the main force in February 1948. But in reality, for instance, the public militia was basically invisible and have very limited influence of the outcome of the February crisis. On other very influential interpretation is that it's not necessary to talk about this political regime, because everything was decided because of the Soviet Union. Of course, the influence of the international actor as Soviet Union was important, and I am a big fan of structural explanations, but it's not enough, and you also must have in mind or combine the structural explanation with actors. And my point of view, the political actors was very important in the battle of the future of the country. That's just some chronological events which were about the Soviet influence. And the first aspect which striking me a lot to this day is we always mention the elections in 1946 was free and fair and democratic, which is unbelievable, because I mentioned just a few type of manipulations which was used and which created very unfair or uneven political competition between the communists and non-communists. And that's not I can mention from all of these that, for instance, very cleverly maneuver of Communist Party, which sell the time of elections, the date which was more important for them, and they have a bigger advantage than if the elections will be later, or, for instance, the ban of political parties, because usually in today's world, if you ban the major political parties from previous electoral cycle, for instance, no one will talk about democracy. It's impossible. And I know the post-war reality was different, but still it was much more like some type of competitive electoral autocracy, as we know today, than democracy. But maybe it's because the Czech historians who work on this topic, at least in my point of view, didn't really work with any theoretical concepts. We still say that this was a democratic period, which is somehow misunderstanding. The same problem was with civil liberties. It's not secret for you, especially, for instance, because a lot of people lost their political rights or citizenship, and we have the forced exodus of German citizens and Hungarian citizens, and the whole topic about retribution court, which was very undemocratic. And I mean, today, a lot of autocrats wishing for have the same institutions like our courts after the Second World War. And in the same time, the lot of these court cases were largely manipulated by the political elites, not only from the Communist Party, but from the elites from all the political parties which governed back in the days, because the political actors believed that in this way they could gain advantage and more piece of power. And unfortunately for them, they lacked the sufficient imagination that after February 48, all these institutions will be used against them. It's quite like very good story, but it's very, very sad. And the last aspect, which is largely missing from current debate about the Czechoslovakia between February 48, is that it was a illiberal regime with strong influence of tutelary powers, especially mainly the secret force, and defense intelligence and police and the military, and all of these actors influence a lot political landscape. But basically, can you imagine contemporary theory of democracy which agree on that the tutelary powers could have influence in politics in democratic country? No, which means this largely can be democratic country. However, thanks to this interpretation of post-war Czechoslovakia, I believe it's harder for us to sell that, for instance, Hungary is not a democracy. Because, yes, experts, even Czech Republic, sometime briefly conclude that there is some problems with Hungarian democracy, but majority of politicians in government know, and it's very hard to explain why Hungary is not a full and liberal democracy to normal people, because the ordinary people don't buy our arguments usually. And I believe that this is because we have, as I mentioned, unspoken illiberal tradition, but we view this as technically the most liberal and democratic period in 40 years time span or 50 years. And thanks to this, I believe our understanding of current political events is worth sometimes lack the liberal and democratic aspect. And for instance, as also thanks to the forced exodus of German and Hungarian citizens, we don't really understand the genocides, ethnic cleansing, and stuff like this. For instance, one of the biggest genocide in the last few decades was genocide in Guatemala. But basically, I never heard in Czech media about genocide in Guatemala. Nobody talk about it. It's just the blank spot in history. And also understanding of the events like on the Middle East or in ex-Yugoslavian countries were very limited, because we still, to the larger part, believe that the forced exodus of German citizens was good and justified. And if the majority of people in our country have this understanding of the event which was very important for them and for the history, it's I understand why we couldn't expect much different point of view on other events in current world. Not mention the genocide or not mention the ethnic cleansing in Africa, because we didn't really care about Africa. For instance, last week there was a hearing in European Parliament when our commissar nomination for the commissar for technically the position which is strongly related to the ODA and other stuff, basically have know nothing about Rwanda. And could you imagine more important African country if you talk about the democratic or money assistance or this stuff than Africa than current Rwanda? No, but technically for us it doesn't exist. And I believe that all of these aspects are largely influential by our debate about our post-war history and the fact that we always like the small explanations, like we was all the victims because the Soviets, because the communists. But I mean, start to unpack this discussion more and start to talk that yes, so somehow we are witness to some results, but it was our politicians who work on it and our ideas and technically something which people from at least some minority want. That's all. Thank you.